Well, welcome to this edition of Rates Roundtable, an ongoing series of informational sessions sponsored by World Voices organization. This particular event is kind of a do-over from a Voiceover Atlanta session, the recording of which turned out to be unusable. So we thought we'd try to do a reprise of that one. All but one from that panel at Voiceover Atlanta is here today. Sean Caldwell couldn't join us, so he's being replaced on very short notice by Allie Murphy. Great to see you, Allie.
Hi, thank you.
Just real briefly, Allie is a British voice actor. She works on commercials and narration and video games. Her previous clients include Disney, Groupon, and British Airways, for just to name a few. Also joining us from the UK, where it's past 8 o'clock on this particular recording, Hugh Edwards, who is a voice director and a casting director. He's cast hundreds of projects in the last decade or so. He's the force behind Gravy for the Brain, and we're just lucky to have him here. Thanks, Hugh, for being with us. And would you like to flesh out the rest of the introductions?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for being here. We also have Brad Newman, who is a New York-based voice actor, sound designer, owner of Uppercut Audio, and he specializes in advertising and marketing as well. Thanks for being here. And next door to me, my VO boss bestie, Gabby Nistico, a voice actress, author, and voiceover coach. And as I mentioned before, she does co-host the VO Boss podcast with us, Business Owner Strategies and Success. And then we also have Ramesh, forgive me, Mahtani, for butchering that probably.
That's fine.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. The newest member of WoVO's board of directors, and all over the world all the time. Voice actor who speaks several languages and has really distinguished himself in the international VO community. Very lucky to have you here. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Also, last but certainly not least, David Rosenthal, voice actor and coach and CEO for the Global Voice Acting Academy, which is home to the industry standard GVAA voiceover rate guide. Thanks, everybody.
No, thanks for being here. So the general topic for this session, and we expect that it's going to range far and wide, but generally we wanted to pose the question, should voice actors share their rates, their compensation rates, what they charge from clients for different genres? I expect there might be some differences of opinion on this, and that's why we're here to discuss. In fact, I'd like to probably start with David on this. David, what do you think? Does it get anybody any traction to share what their rates are?
Well, obviously the GVA rate guide wouldn't be what it is without people sharing rates. It's extremely important that we cull all those rates together, and we are always updating those rates depending on what we are receiving from out there in the field, from boots on the ground people working with and negotiating for the rates that they do create, and ones which in turn help us understand what that environment is out there so that we can create a range that people can negotiate with through our rate guide. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the necessity and the importance of sharing their rate guide with us to create a very consistent, solid platform from which to negotiate. Also, not just individuals, but in the sense that we ask for rate sheets from agents, and some rosters for recording studios and production houses, then yeah, I think that it's interesting because when we give all that feedback and put it all in the mix, certain agents will actually use that rate guide coming back to them for other things that they weren't aware of, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to create somewhat of an even playing field, understanding what we consider to be minimally acceptable rates, but creating a range within that, meaning, yes, there are people who are doing this work for this amount and then this amount.
Yeah, David, I appreciate that perspective. I guess I arrived at this topic for this session because I think more than any other post I see on forums, from voice actors is, oh, I just got a possibility of doing an e-learning, blah, blah, blah. And they want this, and they got so many retakes they want, and they want the file split up. And I just don't know how to rate this. And Hugh, from your perspective with Gravy for the Brain, what do you feed back to people who have that kind of question?
Well, I mean, that's actually why we created our rate guide in the first place. We'd seen what David had done with GVAA's rate guide. It was fantastic, but it only covered North America. And Gravy for the Brain was originally started in the UK. And so we thought we need the same thing. And so, because in the British forums, we see the exact same question that you're talking about. Almost every other post is, how do I charge this? How do I charge that? So it's ever so slightly different in the UK. Mainly because we don't have union and non-union jobs. We do have a union, but the union doesn't really charge or doesn't set rates because we're not allowed to post-Thatcher. So it is ever so slightly different. And there are some jobs, like very few ones, where they have agreements. So for example, if you're doing ADR with a film company or the BBC, they have an agreement between Equity and the production company. And those are in the UK rate guide. But I think fundamentally, there are a couple of reasons why we should display our rates. Firstly, it's setting the bar for everyone in the industry, especially the people who don't really know what those rates are. More importantly, it's showing the newcomers to the industry what they should be charging and not allowing them to undercut what the professional people are doing, because that everyone knows that it just nosedives after that. But thirdly, because from a casting director's point of view, we need to know what the standard rates are as well, so that we're being fair, because often it's the casting directors who set the rates for particular jobs. So having a broad knowledge everywhere across the industry of what rates are, I think, is incredibly important. We've taken that a couple of steps further. We also have a free how to charge session webinar thing that goes with the rate guide, and also one on how to negotiate, because that's just as important. Everybody knows that there may be a standard rate guide, but you've got to go up or you've got to go down. So the negotiation part of it is just as important. So yeah, from my point of view, I think absolutely we need to display our rates.
Gabby, let me ask you something of the same question. You work on both sides of the mic. Producers and clients want to get, the best possible rate for themselves. That means driving down the price, or maybe stating something that's a little below their norm. How do you deal with that? Do you counsel your clients and your students to stand up for themselves and negotiate for the best they can?
Yeah, very much. It's been a few years for me being on the front lines of the casting side of things, but I still do retain relationships with many of those clients. For my students, it's always been about educating, how to stay away from that race to the bottom mentality. I have a website called Just Say No. And it's sayno-to-cheapvo.com, because that's what it's all about. It's really about educating both parties and making sure that the talent understand that it's perfectly okay to value yourself, to stand up for yourself, and to know that there's no reason why you're worth less than anyone else who's doing this professionally day in and day out.
I'd like to, if I could. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. If I could just interject here and just play the devil's advocate and ask the panel, and I'd like to hear from an international perspective, Ramesh, in terms of competition. So that whole thing is, if you publish your rates, where's the competition and how is that affecting what I'm charging, and how do you respond to people who may come in to try and get that job with undercutting rates or so forth.
Well, I suppose it depends so much what market you're talking about. I think when we spoke last in Atlanta, when you work with the North American market, when you work with Northern European markets, I'm talking Scandinavia, Germany, and even the UK, the level of rates have nothing to do with, say, Spain and Portugal and France. So you can talk about half what you can expect. So I do publish my rates on my website, and I usually always start from there. But I'm 99% sure where the rates are going to go for my clients from Spain. And I've had to miss many jobs because they say, you're going to charge me what for this? You do realize I have a whole string of voiceovers who can do exactly the same as you do for half the price. So it's very tricky. It's very tricky, and sometimes I get fed up of having to say no and actually not getting the job. But it depends very much on the markets. I love working with Northern European countries and North America because there is a respect. The rest of the world, I mean, forget places like India, even places like Singapore, where you think it's a very modern and smart economy. They don't pay more than a very, very flat rate for most voiceover jobs because that's the norm. So, you've got to take that into consideration.
Let's get to Brad. Brad, if you could unmute yourself. You in Atlanta, you played out a scenario that you had recently enacted with a client that just was undercutting you, and you decided to just cut them off entirely. Can you go ahead and explain that one?
Yeah, I mean, are we talking about the agent thing or another client?
Yeah.
So the agent scenario came about when one particular conglomerate that does voice work casting acquired Voice Bank, which a lot of agents rely on, it's fine. It is what it is. But when my agent, once that was absorbed, once Voice Bank became part of that other company, they chose and have several other agents to continue that relationship. And now I get that it's a little different, that the union work is where that's flowing and so forth. But, in the past, I have had a pretty strong and vocal stance on I don't want anything to do with that particular company, no matter how far removed. And so when my agent continued to stay with them, and that February deadline that they had kind of came and went on people making a decision, they although were good to my income and my bottom line last year, even if it's removed and it's them having that account, I don't want to do any work in that regard. For me to do work in VO, it has to accomplish two things. It has to be good for me, and it has to be good for the industry. When I got into this industry in '94, if I didn't treat it that way and make sure that the industry was looked after, so to speak, in the future, I wouldn't have that role today either. And so I carry that torch kind of going forward, that if it's not good for the industry today, then I don't need to do that work, because in 10 years, I'd like to still be doing this job. So I just made the decision that I'm going to walk away from that agent. It was a union agent. They paid well, and that's great. But I was pretty confident in my skills and in my ability to get work and in my ability to pick up another agent. And in less than 3 months, I did just that. Very fortunate and happy to have been picked up by Eric Shepard, and things continue. So, people have to make a decision, and everybody has to eat. But for me, quite honestly, I'd rather go work at Wendy's than be involved with that other organization, no matter how far removed.
Hey, here's a scenario that I'm sure you've all seen or maybe dealt with, and that is the client secures you as their talent for a project. It's a long project, and there might be, some more work down the road. Can you give me a lower price for a volume discount? How do you answer that? Maybe you want to answer that one?
Well, yeah, I will, but I'm going to steal it from Brad because he said this at the Atlanta thing. So this is all credit to Brad. You give him the discount on the second job, not the first one, right? Brad, you can answer that in a second. Can I just come back to you though on the point about competition that Gabby made, which is that from my experience, I mean, I've negotiated on both sides from previous jobs and this one, and I think clients very rarely, because this is business to business, remember, this is not business to customer. So clients very rarely turn around and say, right, let's just base this on price. Who can we get for this price? They don't do that. They say, okay, let's search for some voices. They find a voice that they like, and they say, right, great, let's go and find out either if they're going to accept our money or let's go and negotiate for it. And the other thing that they don't do is they don't tend to go and look at your website and see your published rate guide and go, oh, well, their rate guide is $220 per hour, whatever. So that's where we're going to go in, and we'll go under 10%. They just come in and they either ask you or they tell you what's going to happen. And therefore you start a negotiation process. So I'm not convinced that, although it is an argument against it, I'm not convinced that competition works between voiceovers in that way. It works from the voice to the business. And, I mean, I think the other thing is that what we've seen so far in the main is that there are two rate guides. There's the GVAA rate guide, which is brilliant, and there's for the States and Canada. And then there's the UK rate guide with us. And these are kind of these are not individual voice artists saying, okay, here's my rate guide and publishing it. You've got some kind of institution saying it. So maybe the voice artists don't have to publish it themselves and therefore run the risk of someone looking at their website, because the GVA and the GFTB rate guides are already out there.
Right. And
Great
actually,
point.
that is a great point. And, you know, and to that effect, I think it's extremely important that, that we work as a team. And I mean by that, the whole voiceover community works as a team together. That has been one of the resounding things that we've heard over and over again from people who have sought us out. And it's this sense of community that we're trying to bring, right? We're all here because of that sense of community and sense of togetherness and sense of being voice strong. The idea that we are better together than separately. This thing about, oh, I can't share my rates because the whole idea about competition, I think, is a wrong way to think about this to begin with, right? I think that by all coming together, this has come up over and over again about this idea of like, well, I'm only worth 50 quid, or, well, I'm just starting out in the business, like Gabby was talking about some of her students. If you have spent the time and you have spent the time to train, to get a professional studio, to get a professional demo, you have agents who like you, you have, all that kind of stuff. You are a professional. You don't see, plumbers after having gone through plumbing schools saying, well, I'm just starting out, so I can't really offer too much, or, well, I just got, I just made it over the bar. So as a lawyer, I'm just starting out. No way. These guys, you don't expect them to just because you haven't, done a lot of work. You're a professional. And it's really important that you don't belittle yourself or the industry or the idea that you need to lift up and understand your value. And I think the most important aspect that we're trying to go around here in terms of rates is to value yourself correctly, which is as a professional. And if we all did that, I think one of the biggest points, we had a fantastic webinar. It was the first of hopefully many last night, of which World Voices was a part, Global Voice Acting Academy, and the Voiceover Agency Alliance. It was a town hall meeting in which we all got together to talk about the state of the industry as it is and where it could be going. And if everybody, there were over 500 or almost 600 people that signed up, and we had 500 people on that webinar yesterday, and they were all there feeling the togetherness, feeling that sense of community. And if we could all do that constantly, think about us as a community working to, a rising tide, raises all boats. It's the idea that once you're a professional, period. There's a standard rate for which we can all live and grow and make a decent living. And if everybody talked to everybody in that way, saying, then I think that would take care of so much stuff. But you have all these people out there, and this is a point I brought up last night, who are scared. They're just plain scared. They'll say, oh, well, I don't want to lose this job. People like me. People want me. And there's that idea of just being wanted, that they'll lower themselves to take a different rate just to be wanted. And that's a wrong reason for being in this industry. To be wanted.
Really quickly, I know you're talking about, and I love the whole community aspect of it, but there are some people in the industry that will, deliberately come in and advertise their voices for $35 or whatever it is. And so in terms of they're not necessarily part of the community, nor do they care to be. Maybe if some of the speak now comes more towards industry togetherness, or it's saving the industry or elevating the industry, maybe that would appeal. I mean, how do you appeal? My question would be, how do you appeal to those who continue to just go and advertise, cheaper rates so they can get the gig?
Yeah, I don't think that those people will ever go away. I think it's
Agreed.
more, right. I don't think that those people will go away. There are there are just those people who are dead set on getting hamburger money for that night. And they're fine with that. I don't want to try and change those people's minds. I want to change the industry's mind. I want to change the clients and the ad agencies and that's who we want to, and there will be enough work for us on that side of stuff to allow that other stuff to still exist. That's where I believe will happen.
Dave, we just on a quick note on that exact point that David was making. We did a 3-minute video, which is designed to go out to clients and tell them why it's worth paying proper money for it. So I'm happy to share that. It's on our blog anyway, so it's publicly available. I'm happy to share that with you later.
Right.
Great. Yeah. I want to talk about new media. And I understand the analogy of the plumber, and he's a professional. He starts out right out of the chute charging as a professional. But pipes and wrenches haven't changed much over the years, whereas our media, digital streaming, has changed quite a bit, and you have to be agile to stay in that marketplace these days. Brad, maybe you could speak to this one. Is how do you counsel your colleagues to charge for things that maybe aren't on every rate card, like YouTube pre-rolls or any of the other digital streams that are showing up, and there's no traditional rate structure for it?
Right. I think it is still relative to something that hasn't changed. And what hasn't changed is time. We still only have 24 hours in a day. And if you're going to charge $35 for something, okay, well, how many projects are you going to do in a day? How many hours can you spend? And you're going to work your fingers to the bone just to barely get by. And that does not help propel your life or the industry forward. At one point in time, you may or may not be able to do this anymore, or you might be looking at putting a kid through college or doing some other type of retirement. And so that hasn't changed. So the way I look at YouTube and pre-roll and all of that is it's an ad. I mean, we talk about a spot. That's an ad. If it's going to go on YouTube or on the internet on a client site and it is not mid, or post-roll, then I consider those non-broadcast videos. And okay, great, we have a rate for that too. And I'm not necessarily worried about the cycle of those. But if it is running in the form of an ad, to me, it doesn't matter if it's in the middle of Pandora or Spotify or YouTube pre-mid or post-roll, it's an ad.
It's all measurable.
And I'm going to charge it as an ad. It's still, in my mind, broadcast. Broadcast is changing. It's not terrestrial radio per se all the time anymore, but it's still broadcast and it's still an ad. So to me, the vehicle has changed, but the methodology has not.
Yeah. Ramesh, let me get you in here on this. When this gets into negotiation techniques, but if you're talking to a client about a prospective job, do you ever at any point say, well, look, let's arrive at a meaningful compensation. What's your budget?
I very often start straight from there. When you get a feel for the client and you know where they're coming from, if it's not a regular client, if it's a new client, you want to get a feel, you want to get a pulse of where they're coming from. And as I said, I live in Spain. A lot of my work is coming from Spain, but it comes in the English medium. And I just know where the shots are going. And it's often a negotiation process. And very often I lose the gig. Lately, this year, 2018, I don't know what's happened, but it seems as if many of my traditional clients and my new clients do not respond. I don't know if anyone else is feeling it. I'm finding a very sluggish voiceover market, and I fear that it's the jobs are going to newbies who are unfortunately doing it for a fraction of the price. Occasionally, I hear from those clients and say, Ramesh, actually, we're coming back to you. Please give us a better rate. And I know because they've had it done from someone who's done a botched job, but I've still got to negotiate because they can't afford my normal rates. What do you do? You know, it's a very tricky game, and you can only lose 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 gigs before you think, well, how far can I continue? It's a tough one. It's very tough.
And Gabby, what I keep hearing from the seasoned pros is that, as David said, there'll always be those people around that are going to take a bottom dollar hamburger money, but let those people go. You can't fight them ultimately. So what I hear from seasoned pros is that's okay. There will always be prospective clients who appreciate a seasoned professional voice actor and who will pay the rate. Are you finding that?
Yeah. Most definitely.
Good.
That's where the majority of my work falls into. But to me, it harkens back to the unification idea. We'd all like to say that it's free market in what we do, and I mean it is. So hence why there will always be the undercutters. But if we look back at voiceover 20 years ago, maybe a little bit further, most voice actors, especially those who were unionized, they didn't have to talk about rates because they all knew they were making the same amount. They all knew exactly what the costs were and what was being charged. I mean, Joe Cipriano has some really great stories about him and Don LaFontaine joking at dinner about how, it's just, go ahead, get the caviar. It's just a spot and a tag,
Yeah.
Because they knew, everyone knew exactly how much they were. So it was kind of strange that we didn't have that problem then.
Yeah, no, that's the same.
Yeah, I think what we're trying to do now is educate to the point where we bring some of that unification back and get more people on the same page again, whether it be GVA rate guide, gravy for the brain, SAG-AFTRA, whatever it is, just something that helps to get more of us working in a standardized structure.
Mm-hmm.
If the benchmarks are set.
Yes.
Yeah. Benchmarks are set now.
One of the things that came out from the event, and this was on Wednesday night, the town hall meeting that David was alluding to, is that awareness, education is so important, advocacy. We talk about the voiceover community, but it's not really that cohesive. Do you actively, any of you, talk to your colleagues, your cohorts about, what is the appropriate thing to charge?
Well, I do all the time. I mean, that's part of my job. My daily job is to keep that conversation going, and also to be able to log all that stuff in so that we can keep up and create up new updates and stuff like that. And it's very interesting that I would say by and large that the people who are starting to book consistent work are booking consistent work at their fees, not at lower fees, which is really, really interesting. And I think it's because they know what their value is. They know how to negotiate for that value, and they won't go into that other area. And this is this is such an extremely important way to look at your worth. We had somebody who recently came to us for a negotiation situation, and and because they had come in, the client had come in asking for $250 for something that on the rate guide was $850, and I said, "Well, great, you got the rate guide. Go back." And she said, "Well, how do I do that?" She said, "Oh, you just go there and you said you're looking for a professional job to be done." And they said, "Well, yes, of course." And he said, "Okay, so these are the professional rates. It sounds like what you're asking for is that your job is actually a substandard job, that you're looking for substandard voiceover for." And they said, "No, so it's this different." So anyway, they got really flustered about this, and they said, "Oh, so you're going to get you'll end up with a substandard project then. Congratulations." And so they had told this woman, we do not have any more money for you. They said, "Okay, just wait a second. We didn't know there were these standardized rates." They came back and offered her $700. And she said, "I'm sorry, it's $850. So they went somewhere else. They got somebody else for $500. They botched the job. They came back and asked her $850. They ended up paying $1,350 for a job.
There you go.
So, there you go. So, I mean, it is really possible as long as you understand the difference between excellence, which is what we're offering, and good enough. Mm-hmm. So you have to say, does your company care? Is your company a good enough company? Is that the way you want to be perceived by the world, or do you want excellence? Because if you do, you know where to come, and you know that you'll get that professional service all the way through the process. That's the way we look at it.
Yep.
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask about, okay, so educating ourselves about what we're worth is great, and basic negotiation practices. How, and actually I'd like to pose this question to Hugh, how, because I think you've done this already before, I've heard you tell stories, how do you really educate the end client? Because I think it starts there with their perceived value of what a voiceover is worth. So what are some ways that you've gone ahead and tried to educate from that end?
Yeah, so I mean, one of my jobs as a casting and a voice director is we own the whole project. Okay, so like EA or someone will come along to us and say, look, we've got this game. Here's the script. Go and quote it for us. So we go back to them with a realistic quote with realistic prices, and they go, holy crap, that was like really expensive, and we say no, and here's why. So, I mean, from my point of view, it's relatively easy to do because on that side, in the gaming and the film world, I'm pretty much known by the producers. They know who I am, and the company has long-standing history. So that does it itself. For voiceover artists to do that individually, though, it's actually quite a difficult thing to do because I might be used to speaking to, multinationals or corporates or whatever, but they may not be, especially when they're on the newer side. And there are two facets to this. The first one is how you talk to them, the language you use, and the way you negotiate with them, and how you hold your cards to your chest and all that kind of stuff. That's the negotiation part of it. And the other part of it is understanding when you, as a voice artist, are ready. Because everything we've talked about tonight is presuming that you are a 100% tip-top voice artist. But not everyone in the industry is. And some of them find it difficult to get in front of clients and then get to those rates, and then they do the job and the client isn't happy because maybe they're not ready yet. Maybe they haven't had enough education, they haven't had enough training, maybe they just haven't had enough on mic time. So like David, part of our job is that constant mentoring that we do with people, and we offer that service for free. For people to just come in and find out what we think of them, and we're always completely honest, constructively or not. So that there are those two facets to it. But again, going back to the link I just sent to Dave, because it's hard to speak to those people sometimes, we've just created this video which basically shows them, it references the music licensing idea. And it's exactly the same, because you go through and someone creates it, and even if it's someone else's script, you have your performance right to it. And so you are licensing that to somebody. So as long as you're using the right legal terminology, and then you go back and say, so here's why it costs this much for 1 year. And if you want it for 2, that's fine. We can do a deal on that, and that's how much it's going to be. And if you want it for 3 or 4, that's fine. If you want it for 5, here's why it is exceptionally high. If you want a completely bought out price, I can do that for you, but it is probably going to be prohibitively high. And showing them the scale initially shows them why they are on that scale, and it's not just some arbitrary thing. It's not just that with your rates,
Hey, Gabby, or anybody else who wants to respond to this one. I've done enough of these rates roundtables to know that the people who watch, the people who listen, and some of them are new, and they know they're new, and they don't have that heft of being a seasoned pro for so long. And maybe the client even knows that they're fairly new, and they're saying, look, this is all great. All this talk about setting your rates high is all great, but I'm fairly new, and I'm maybe going to have to set a lower rate to get started. How do you respond to them? What do you say? Do you say, okay, fine, start at a little bit lower, but then always graduate when you get more experience? How do you handle that one, Gabby?
Truthfully, I do not believe that a new talent is worth less than any of us. So
I hear that a lot. Yeah.
Yeah, it's something I try to instill in them early on. If they're going to have extra negotiating room, wiggle room because of their newness, then it has to be slight. It has to be reasonable. It has to be within a certain parameter. If it's too severe, it's not doing anyone any good. And like David was saying earlier, any other industry, any other profession, new does not necessarily mean less money. It, in some cases, means more because of better and newer technology, more education, newer technique. I mean, there's so many facets to that are critical. And you know, again, the acting world mirrors that. Talent agents don't play that game if they don't care. So yeah, why should we do that to ourselves?
Yeah, I get that question a lot from people. Yes, Ellie.
I was just going to add to that, because I was having a conversation with an incredibly talented British voice artist, and she was telling me that she now feels like she can't raise her rates because she started years ago and had that mentality of like, well, you know, I'm new and I can't really charge that much. And now she was like, I'm going to lose all my clients if I raise these rates up. So what you have to know is whether you've got any experience at all. You have to set your rates at a reasonable level, because it's very hard to work your way up once you've started that low. And I also think as well, you know, people come in and they see some of these horrific pay-to-play sites where they want to charge $50 for a voiceover. And if you're not experienced in this industry, you think, oh, well, that's how much people charge. That's the standard. So if you have a good rate to start off with, you're not going to have to dig yourself out that hole, because people who start that low tend to not have long careers because it's not sustainable. You can't work 9 to 5 and have it as a full-time career if you're charging that little. And it's the same with the production companies that want to pay that little. I see so many clients. I just went through my whole client list and I was looking at the people that have always done the low ball rates, and I went on their websites, and most of them have gone now because they can't sustain it either. It's not going to keep your business going if you're only charging a little or you're only paying people for substandard work. So really, if you want the industry to stay strong, if you want to stay in the industry as a new artist, you have to know what your worth is and what the worth of everybody around you is as well, to keep your career going and keep it going higher.
I think it's also, just really quickly, just to make the point that you know, Ann and Gabby are constantly talking about, is in relation to that professionalism and being and feeling comfortable charging a certain rate, comes the professionalism from what we see on your website, the way you brand and the way you market yourself. You can't expect to do all this, and like any good professional business, marketing and branding and an awareness of yourself is so important to that. So to leave that out of the equation, I think it's a non-starter. It won't happen without all of that.
Yes, Hugh.
Yeah, I was just going to make a quick point again on the same topic. Something that happened to me, which I noticed around about 10, 12 years ago. And it was that I was hiring in like 40, 50 voices for a computer game session over like a month, whatever it was. And the seasoned pros were coming in and killing it in an hour, right? And we had a very similar script. And then the newer people were coming in and doing it in 3 and basically getting 3 times the money. So there is a difference between being new and being amateur, right? That's a big difference. So you need to get to that point. But if you do want to know how to price yourself, price at the same kind of rates. But if you know it's going to take twice as long, then only charge what a professional would do, which is the 1 hour, not the 2 that it's going to take you.
Good point. Yeah. Look, a couple of our panelists have to go on to another appointment, so I want to be respectful of the time. I want to thank everybody on this brain trust today. This has been an exciting discussion. It's been a worthwhile discussion. I'm going to make sure it gets posted to all of you so you can distribute it as you see fit. I really appreciate all your time. I want to thank Ali and especially Hugh and Ramesh for joining us at a late hour across the pond, so to speak. Thank you so much, all 3 of you. David, here's the 2 webinars within 15 hours. So, so nice going. And Gabby and Ann, I know you're off to something else. It's so great to have all this. Brad, you guys are all just so eloquent in speaking to the truth of what we need to get to with rates and sharing rates and being honest about our rates to our clients. Any last minute comments?
I would really quickly like to say that the webinar that you and I did last night with VOAA is going to be available on the VOAA YouTube channel within a day or so. And so, alluding to all that, if you really want more information and more food for thought, you can watch that there too.
Yeah, this is a great discussion. Thank you all. Great to see you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
And
Be well.